think my... So welcome everyone to this year's Manchester in Translation, a virtual conference taking place today, tomorrow and Wednesday to celebrate International Mother Languages Day. I'm Nia Thomas. So welcome everyone to this year's Manchester. I'm Nia Thomas, Events and Conferences Coordinator at Comma Press, an independent publishers based in Manchester who champion the short story and works in translation. We're delighted to welcome Tiffany Tsao as our keynote to kick off Manchester in Translation 2023. I just have a bit of housekeeping before we begin. So we welcome questions from all of you tuning in live. If you have any questions or thoughts throughout the talk, please do pop them in the chat below or to the side of your screen. Tiffany's talk will last around 45 minutes, and after she's spoken, we'll select a few questions to round off the talk. Please do share and tweet about the conference using the hashtag MIT2023. And finally, if you're interested in tuning into any of our other events this week, just meet us back here, same time, tomorrow and on Wednesday. And for any of our local Greater Manchester viewers, please do check out all the other exciting events happening across the city over the next fortnight on the UNESCO Manchester City of Literature website. Now, I'm delighted to introduce you to Tiffany Tsao, who translates Indonesian fiction and poetry into English. Her translation of Norman Erickson Pasaribu's Happy Stories Mostly was the winner of the 2022 Republic of Consciousness Prize for Small Presses and was longlisted for the International Booker Prize. Her most recent translation is the short story collection People from Bloomington by Buddy Dharma. She's a novelist and has an English PhD from UC Berkeley. So I will pass on to you now for your keynote. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Nia. And hi, everyone. So as Nia and I were just talking, I can't actually see anyone and I can't see any of the comments in the YouTube live chat. So apologies if it looks like I'm just ignoring anything in the live chat. I think you have to then, if you have any questions, type them in and then they get relayed onto me. But yes, I can just see no one except me right now. So that's a bit weird. I feel like I'm talking into an abyss. Anyway, yeah, so I'm giving the keynote for this year. And I guess I was thinking as I was writing the keynote, what would be good to natter on for about 45 minutes that would be interesting and useful. And after some thinking about it, I sort of settled on talking about the long haul. So sort of how to keep translating and how not to lose your energy while doing it. And partly it was inspired by, just me reflecting on, the years I've spent translating, the books I've spent time translating. Now have translated 5 published books of Indonesian fiction and one poetry book. That includes one poetry book into English. And yeah, I guess it's like thinking like, oh, how did I do that? And then what's next? And things that I found useful for sort of, keeping on going. And at the same time, I guess I've also, at this point in my career, also talked a lot with other literary translator friends who have shared stories too about just difficult things that have happened to them, or challenges or annoyances. So not even like really like difficult like catastrophes, but just things that can happen that sort of maybe, I don't know, make things just a little more unpleasant. Like, interestingly enough, right? I don't think the work itself, the nature of the work itself, like is not an obstacle. Like most literary translators I know, and I know for me, like I really enjoy the work I do. I enjoy the work of translating, but it's the other things that come with being a literary translator and that sometimes are part of your role as a literary translator that can make things a bit more difficult. So this is just, sort of thinking about if you're, at the start of your career, how to, keep on going and manage that. Manage, expectations, manage yourself, manage your mental well-being, emotional well-being, manage your time. But also, hopefully maybe this will be, I don't know, I guess, what is it, useful for, I guess, people who are also in a kind of mid-career slump as well. Okay. So, literary translation is one of those fields where, right, the more experience you accrue, actually you should get better at it, right? Like in some sense, you would think like, oh, it becomes easier. Not just in terms of the craft of it, but also in terms of useful contacts, useful knowledge, reputation that ideally would bring more work your way. But I think, it's also possible to reach a point of burnout, or if not burnout, then a lack of motivation. And I think maybe this does have to do with the fact that translating involves porous boundaries, right? It involves you writing a work that is not yours into another language. So in some sense, right, it's not so clear cut, right, as being a writer, which is the other part of what I do, right? So I do write my own work. I write novels. And that, in a sense, is more clear cut because I'm like, this is my novel. These are my words, right? And in translation, it's a little bit more complicated because your emotions kind of get caught up in the work that belongs to someone else. And then your identity, I think, kind of like you feel, I think that it creates a little bit of, I don't know, confusion inside, and it can be a really good thing and a life-giving thing. Like I've formed very wonderful relationships with some of my authors. And I love that. But also, at the same time, I do recognize that there's a sort of like mental pull and push there because you're dealing with, in some sense, right, another psyche, another person's words, etc. And then there's also the fact that you then have to bring this work to other people, and you're sort of sometimes often will, in my case, be put in a space of like negotiating and things like that. And I'm very lucky. I work, for most of my translations, I've worked with an agent, but, like I can imagine like it would be doubly or triply difficult for a translator working alone and playing that literary agent role alone. So, let's first talk about, okay, so it sounds very pessimistic. I'm talking about all the bad things and all the stresses. But let's talk about maybe how translation would go in an ideal world. And then we'll talk about like all of the little things that can go bad. And I guess then what do we do as translators to cope with that, and to not just cope, right, but to still find joy in this very joyful, and life-giving work, because it's a really cool, work to do. And, how we can sort of manage those things so we don't get so weighed down. Because I think they can get one down over time just from, talking to other translators as well. This is what I've gathered. Okay, so ideal scenario. Let's start with ideal scenario 1. So you, the translator, know a great work. You think it's a really cool and you would love to translate it. So you get in touch with the author and or whoever else holds, the English language rights, maybe the original publisher, and then you ask them for permission to pitch the book to English language publishers. So you do, and a publisher is very interested. And they're like, "Wow, this is great. This sounds great." And then they arrange a contract. They arrange they arrange contract with the author and the rights holder. They arrange a contract with you as a translator, and then they appoint you as a translator for a very nice sum of money that you're very excited to, you're like, yeah, I could totally translate for that. And I love translating. And I love the work. Great. All these wonderful things together. The translation process goes really smoothly. The translation is published to great acclaim, and people say, wow, what a great book. What a great author. What a great translator. Okay, so that would be an ideal scenario. Or ideal scenario 2, you, the translator, are approached by a publisher to translate a book that they want to publish. And you love the book. You translate a sample, you get a job. You negotiate for an amazing fee plus royalties, as good as it gets for a translator, sign a contract, the translation process goes smoothly, translation published to great acclaim, and people say, wow, what a great book, what a great author, what a great translator you are. Okay, needless to say, it won't always go either of these ways, and lots of things can go pear-shaped along the way. So for example, could get just cut off right at the pass. A great work that you'd love to translate, you get permission, and then you can't get a publisher interested, right? So you basically keep pitching and no publisher is interested at all. And then you never get to, translate the whole book, or you've translated a great deal for the sample in order to get publishers interested and you still can't find a publisher. So that can be very dispiriting. Or you pitch the book and you get the publisher interested, and then they follow up with the author and the publisher or whoever holds the rights, and they sign a contract with them, and then they hire a different translator. And this, people have told me has happened, right? So they go with a different translator, even though you're the one who brought them the work. So it's like, ow. Very heartbreaking. Or, these are all the different pear-shaped scenarios. Pear-shaped scenario C, when it comes to negotiating a deal, you're offered an unexpectedly low sum of money or a low fee to translate the work. And you take it because you feel like you have no choice and you're already very emotionally invested in the project and you spend a lot of time working on the pitch, translating the sample. You just feel really excited about it, but the money's not there, but you're like, it's okay, I'll just, it's fine, I'll just deal with it, but it's quite low. So then you spend a lot of time translating and you don't feel like you've been sufficiently monetarily remunerated for your time and your effort. Pear-shaped scenario D, translation process takes much longer than you thought, turns out to be really difficult. You start getting frustrated that you're working so hard for so little pay. And that can happen, even when you are still like loving the work and you love translation, that you can just feel like, why am I spending so much time and effort on this? Because I love the work, but but I'm getting paid so little. And sometimes when you think about it, it can be frustrating. So that's actually kind of like related to scenario C. One last scenario, I promise. I know that most of you are probably already like, oh my gosh, this is so, what is it? Discouraging. I'm just going to turn this off. No, not yet. Okay, so pear-shaped scenario, last one. You feel, okay, so the work gets published and you're like, yes, I translated this work. Look, it's come out into the world. And let's say the book comes and goes without a sound. Like you feel, you're expecting like tons of reviews, really good ones. Publishers Weekly was going to give it a star review. It was going to win some translation prizes. And then it didn't. And then that was that. And it just feels very anticlimactic. Wow, you did all of that work, you put in all of that labor, you worked so hard on it for you feel like, for nothing, right? So in light of these things, right, how can we keep going as translators and not in some like horrible masochistic way, like, oh, okay, these conditions are like so unideal, who would do them, but I will do them and I will just keep on going and like, plodding along, not like that. But, in general, like to continue translating in a sustainable and healthy way. To you as well, while and keeping your attitude towards, translation good, so let's talk about that. I'm going to share some slides now. So I think, Nia, let me know if something just looks funny on the YouTube end. Okay, so share screen. Okay. Okay. So hopefully people can see that. Let me just... Okay. Oh, I see. Okay, sorry. Okay. So hopefully people can see that. So, so these are just some strategies that I've come up with. I'm sure there are like tons more things like meditation. Meditation's not on here. I don't know how to meditate. I probably should learn how to meditate. Okay, so I think the first thing that is a good thing to do, especially if you are in the position to choose your projects. I'm in I don't know, the good and the bad position of being able to choose my projects, because the bad thing about it is that it means that no one, like I rarely, almost never get offered projects to translate. That's happened once recently, and I had to turn it down for various reasons, just for time commitment reasons. But before that, I had never been offered a project to translate. So I don't know if this is different from other languages, which are more represented, and I guess because I translate from Indonesian, which is considered an underrepresented language on the world market, that what is it? That I always have this almost like, is the grass greener on the other side? I don't know. So I picture all these acclaimed German and French and Dutch translators with like all of these offers coming in saying like, oh yes, translate this. Do you want to translate this? I don't get that. So I am in, perhaps the unenviable, but also the enviable position of choosing my projects, because unless I basically choose them or, even find them, then they don't happen. And I would say that, this is, it's made a big difference to me to choose projects that are meaningful, because, yeah, I think, and there are various reasons that a project can be meaningful, right? So they can be of, a book of particular literary, cultural, or historical importance. So, maybe stylistically, you just think that this book is really cool, or, this author was groundbreaking in some way, or, like historically, this is just, such an interesting book, because it's set during this period, or it deals with this thing that hasn't been dealt with in literature that in translation from this country before. So, or, it can deal with a minority within that country or within that language group that you're translating from, so for all of those reasons, I think it's also good to, it might be good to also think about, how a work can be meaningful in the sense that, the author of the work deserves more recognition from a foreign audience. So there might be someone who's like so famous in, I don't know, for example, Thai literature, or a work that is just very seminal, right, in Thai literary history, but that hasn't been, translator isn't known about, right? And, that can be another reason to choose a project. So, and then also, of course, there's, a book that, is personally meaningful to you, or a poet or an author that's personally meaningful to you, something that you read and you just enjoyed very much, or that really stuck with you, and you think other people will enjoy it too. And the reason that I think that, it's useful to choose projects that are meaningful in terms of trying to think about how to sustain joy. How to sustain joy as a literary translator is that, when things get difficult, I think the motivation of a higher cause can be very significant. Let's say, a few things go pear-shaped a little bit, during the project. But if you do finish the project, right, will you be proud that you did, project X, right? Is it something you can be proud of? Or even if, something goes pear-shaped and you don't get to finish translating it, will you say like, can you say like, oh, well, at least I tried. I think that was like a really worthwhile way to spend my time and my energy. And I think, that's very useful, right? To remember that literary translation, there is that component of it, right? That you're translating kind of for a higher cause, for the benefit of readers, for the benefit of getting, the literature that you're, or the work that you're translating into a wider audience, so that they can be more appreciated, right? There's that component to it as well. And I think it can be sometimes easy to lose sight of that, when you're kind of in the field itself, in the trenches. See, I've made this war analogy now, and I feel like that's not a very good one because, you know, it sounds like I'm likening translation to fighting a war, which ideally shouldn't happen. So don't take that analogy too far. Okay, so another thing that I think is super useful, I guess, in literary translation, and this is something that, I don't know, I kind of want to say, not as I do, but as I say. So as I say, not as I do, because I think I am very good at not keeping healthy boundaries, but I have become more aware of and am trying to keep healthier boundaries as a literary translator and other aspects of my life and emotional life and all of that as I continue. And, you know, just to say that, you know, setting healthy boundaries is also, this is something that probably will take some feeling out for yourself, and it probably will take some experiential learning, and it may not stay constant, right? So when you're starting out, I would say that it's harder as a literary translator to set those boundaries hard and fast, because you feel like you have no choice. You feel like you just want to get your foot in the door, and that those are, you know, valid concerns, right? So you will do things, make sacrifices in order to get that foot in the door. But, you know, this is sort of an ongoing process, right? And then once you sort of have, I guess I think gotten your foot in the door, then you can start thinking about, you know, okay, what boundaries do I want to set? What do I want to do differently from the first project? And then after the second project, you can also, you know, recalibrate, third project, recalibrate, all of that. And by projects, I don't mean necessarily a successful project or a published project, because, you know, as I mentioned at the start of this talk, you know, there might be projects that don't make it to, you know, through all of the stages, but I think they should still be considered projects, and there are things that you can learn from, even if they don't succeed, quote unquote. Okay. So with regards to time, I think this is something to keep in mind, especially when you're negotiating your first contracts. Like, I think, I know that when I first started out, I would be very, optimistic. And I would say like, oh yeah, I can do that. I can translate this. I think the first novel I translated, I think I set a very optimistic timeline. Optimistic meaning, you know, like I really had to work very, very hard to make that deadline. And I think I was late by a day. And because I don't like being late at all, I got really stressed out. I was like, oh no, I'm late by a day. And then I thought, okay, maybe they won't notice. But then the publisher actually did notice and was like, you're late by a day. And I was like, oh, I'm late by a day. And then I got it in and it was okay. But, you know, I did this at a time when I think I was supposed to write my second novel, which also had a deadline. So, you know, doing this translation while writing second novel, and I had just had a baby. And then the baby came, my first child came 2 weeks ahead of schedule. And for some reason, it just had never occurred to me that my child would be born 2 weeks beforehand. So that just threw everything off, because I was busy having a newborn instead of having all of this time during the day and night to you know, do my writing work and do my translation work. And I think it was because everyone told me, oh, you know, it's a boy, boys come later. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if half the things they told me were true. And then they said like, oh, you know, first child, oh, you know, it'll probably be late, you know, don't count it, it'll be late. So I just was expecting like due date or late, and then came 2 weeks. He came 2 weeks ahead. But I love it. Okay. Sorry, digression, back to this. So yeah, so with time, like, so I was very optimistic, and now I tend to be much more conservative. If I think like, oh, I can probably get it done by then, I probably will try and say like, it might be, and then I'll add maybe 2 or 3 months, because I know now that I think I work quite slowly. I tend to be like a bit of like in the tortoise and the hare. I tend to like sort of slow and steady, but pretty slow, you know. you know, as I go. But I think that's, you know, something to keep in mind, and also, you know, think about, right, how much, so in addition to, you know, thinking about this as, you know, like, oh, how much time do I have when negotiating the deadline in contracts? I would say, you know, it's good to think about how much time you have to set aside, you know, per day, per week. Take into consideration, are you working on other projects at the same time? Are there personal circumstances that you have that you know will slow you down? And you do have some say in this. So I would say, you know, set healthy limits as far as you are able. Because, you know, the more, I think the more we spend in these areas, and I'm going to go through 3: time, emotions, and finances. The more you spend on those, in those areas, and the more you feel like you're not getting compensated for the amount of time you're spending in those areas, the more resentment starts to creep in, and the more like you can just feel like you're not, you know, that this isn't a fulfilling or rewarding activity, when actually I think, yeah, you yourself can create the conditions where you can find it fulfilling and rewarding, because it can be immensely so. So, you know, the other areas, emotions, you know, obviously some investment, emotional investment is very good. You know, in fact, emotional investment, I would say, is very good. But I would say try to keep a check on whether you're unhealthily emotionally overinvested in a project. Because if you're overinvested, and I think there is such a thing as being overinvested, the more it can wreck you if something goes wrong. So let's say you spent really like so much time and so much energy and so much love, like, you know, working on a translation, you know, of a book. Let's say it's a book project, and you work on it, and something goes wrong at the end. Let's say, I don't know, just for example, like, you know, the author or the publisher make the decision to, you know, strike your name from the cover, or you really thought that you were going to have your name on the cover, but it's not there. Or, you know, like when the publicity time comes, this is just, for example, these are just things that have sprung to mind. When it's time for publicity, right, you aren't acknowledged at all. And then, or, you know, like, as I said, you know, if the book comes and goes without making a splash, through no fault of your own and no fault of the author's, right, then you can feel a bit like, you know, quite downcast, because, you know, you put all of your emotion into that. And I guess I'm not saying don't emotionally invest. I would say there are definitely like very good emotions, and there are very good emotions that are associated with translating, and, you know, do keep you going, right? Joy, right? The joy of translating, the sense of purpose, right? Sense of pride in one's work, right? But I think it's very easy, at least for me, to slide into bad emotions too, right? Over obsession, right? So like you're spending way, for some reason, you're just thinking about it all the time in a way that, you know, may not necessarily be good and may detract from other areas of your life. Or guilt, right? Guilt is one that I feel a lot, like, am I doing enough? Did I do enough? Can I do more? What am I doing wrong, right? Over attachment. I would say, you know, try to keep the good emotions and not let them slide into the bad, because, you know, there are different emotions, right? So I guess what I'm saying is maybe try and really like be in touch with that and think like, okay, so is this emotion I'm feeling, is it unhealthy, you know? And are there healthier emotions that I can sort of encourage and facilitate, rather than feeding the unhealthy emotions? And in the sense, you know, I do think it helps to have other projects or things in your life that can serve as an outlet for emotion and emotional attachment, and where you can also receive emotional nourishment. And this is, you know, I'm sure lots of people have heard this analogy before, but it's a bit like, you know, if you're a cup, and if you're drained, and if you're just, you know, drained, you don't have anything in you, how can you give anything? How can you give other people water if your cup doesn't have any water, right? So I try and think of it like that right now, right? So rather than thinking of it as like, oh, I'm being greedy and filling myself with water, it's like, okay, I'm filling myself with water so that I can continue being the best translator I can be, and continuing to have energy and enthusiasm for translation projects. And I think, yeah, emotions are interesting. I was talking with another translator recently, and I think the emotional side can easily take over in translation because of what I'll get to next, which is the difficult financial side of things. It's almost because there's no money or little money to be gotten from it, that you almost have to emotionally invest, because the emotional investment, right, is what motivates you to complete the translation, right? Because there's not the what is it, the monetary recompense. It's like pushing you to do it. So then you compensate, right? Like, where's my fuel? Okay, so it's emotion. So again, like I just think it's good to keep tabs on that a little bit. The last is finances. This is very important. I know that there are, literary translators who do make a living from translation, and I just want to say that I have never been able to or figured out a way to, and I don't know if it's the fact that I translate, from underrepresented language group or my particular language group, or I also, only do literary translation. I don't translate other kinds of documents as well. So that might also play a part in it. I don't have publishers like offering, I'm not on a list of, where publishers just offer me books to translate. So I think that's it as well, right? If I start a project, I basically have to decide myself that I want to start that project. That's a cool project, and then work to do that project. So I don't know why, but I'm, so I guess my advice on this will be skewed because of my particular position. Right. And I think I've come to the conclusion myself that I don't think it's healthy to overly rely on literary translation for your bread and butter, or to expect too much from it. Because I think even when we want to have high expectations, that there might not be the material circumstances that can deliver, even if we want to like have high expectations and fight for them. And I don't think, right, that this is to say don't negotiate, and like and I'm not saying like, oh yes, just work for ridiculously low or no pay. I think doing so will make you very stressed. But I have noticed, for example, and this is just from personal experience. So 2021 in October, I got a part, and it was completely unrelated to translation. It was for the Sydney Review of Books in Australia. And it made a huge difference to my attitude. And I don't think I had thought it would make that huge of a difference of an attitude, a huge difference. Did not think that such a difference would be made to my attitude towards my written and translation work, by having that extra, just a part-time job, right? But a steady income, where I didn't have to, claw it each time, like it wasn't just contingent on me producing the thing or translating the thing or writing the thing. It just came in a steady stream, and I could just steadily work as long as I was working in, that area, the area that were my tasks at that job. And it just made I was so much happier, and it was just surprising to me. I was like, I feel really like I have all of this energy and this creative energy, and I just feel like really happy doing these things where, I'd say like right before, because I'd started looking for a part-time job for a reason, right? And I'd been saying at that time, oh, okay, well, I'm starting to feel really grumpy, and, like, it's just like, I love writing and I love translating, but I don't know why I just feel very tired and very stressed. And, I wish, like I could make more money doing, but all of a sudden, that burden was lifted. And that's not to say I started saying like, oh, I'm just going to do it all for free or, whatever. But I think it just made me like genuinely happier. And it made me remember that, I liked doing these other things. Hello? Nia? Am I back on? Hi, Nia. Hello?
Hi.
Am I back on?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Am I back on?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Nia. Hello?
Hi.
Am I back on?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay. So where was I? I was with finances. Okay. But I think there will come those times when you have to make those calls. And I think that, I'm not going to say never spend any money on submitting or never spend any money on entering a contest or never spend any money, like to do something that you think will further your career or is a good opportunity. I think that's a call that you have to make yourself, right? But I think you have to do it in a way that you kind of have to make it up your mind and say sort of no regrets when you do it. And I'll give an example, like a personal example. So earlier on in my career, Norman Erickson Pasaribu, the Indonesian poet and writer, and I had just begun working together, and we entered the English Pen Presents East Asia and Southeast Asia contest, and that was in 2017. And because we were one of the 6 finalists, 6 winners, 6 etc., we were called to, say like, oh, do you want to participate in this in-person pitching event where you get to pitch to real live publishers, this work and why they should publish it. And there was no, funding available for the flight and there's no, they didn't offer to pay for the flight or anything, right? Or, for anyone. So then, had to make a call, right? Do I fly to, and I live in Sydney usually. So I was like, do I fly from Sydney, Australia to London just for this event? And it could be a really good opportunity, or do I not and pass? And then in the end, I decided to fly. And, I don't have any regrets because at the time, that it is what resulted in the contract for Sergius Seeks Bacchus. I met a few UK publishers there at the time. Didn't win the pitch event. Natasha Bruce, who's a very cool translator too, won the event. And then we weren't sure what winning the event meant because it was just sort of like a play pitch event. But then anyway, so sorry, digression. So then went, and then that's how and then I spoke with Deborah Smith, who at the time was still with Tilted Access. She's the founder of Tilted Access Press. And, she said, oh, like this work sounds really interesting. Please email me, keep in touch. We'd be very interested in publishing it. And, that's Sergius Seeks Bacchus, the poetry collection, which came out then in 2019 with Tilted Access Press, came out of that, right? And that might not have happened. That probably wouldn't have happened if I hadn't chosen to spend the money to go, right? But it was a really hard call at the time. And, sometimes I do think like, oh, what happens if it hadn't resulted in anything? Would I have been really like upset? Maybe, I don't know. But I guess this is all to say that, these are these calls that you'll have to make. And I don't think you should necessarily be mad at yourself, and don't beat yourself up if you feel like, is it the right decision? Why do I have to make this decision? I made the wrong decision, because I think, I think as long as you are still thinking about it, and setting boundaries and setting limits on yourself, and how much you're willing to spend, then, and you yeah, and you're just aware, then I think, yeah, those are the boundaries that you have to set yourself. But I think it's just important to know, to think about that, think that there are financial boundaries. And that also includes the opportunity cost, right? So the time you spend on translating that you could be spending on other projects or, you know, another job that might be paying more, right? So those are also things to think about as well. And I just want to say also that, you know, it's okay to say no. Like, even if you say no and you're like, oh, I should have said yes. I think it's okay to say no because you wanted to say no at that time for that reason. And it's okay. Don't feel like, I think sometimes we get major FOMO when we feel like, okay, we're saying no, but we're just throwing away this opportunity, throwing that away opportunity. They handed me opportunity on a silver platter, and then I batted away the silver platter and said, no, it's not like that. It's not like that. You know, like, you can tell yourself that narrative, but I think it is okay to say no, and there will be more opportunities that do come your way. Another thing that has been really, I found life-giving for me is finding translator friends or, you know, a translator community whom you trust and who can provide, you know, really good emotional support, moral support. And also there'll be times when you're in a situation and you're like, is something wrong with my perception? Am I misunderstanding this? Or is this a very wrong situation for me to be in? And you need fellow translators who will back you up and look at it and go, yeah, that's really wrong. No, they shouldn't have done that to you. That's really wrong. And then you can go, right, it's not just me. It's, you know, it was actually wrong. Another good thing about being friends with other translators, you can discuss specific contract terms, what it was like to work with certain publishers, which publishers, you know, were difficult to work with or stressful to work with, things that aren't officially out there or that you won't find in writing and that you won't find by Googling. Those are really useful. Tremendous source of encouragement when you're feeling down. Yeah, so I'd had like, you know, translator friends that were friends before, but now I'm part of this Southeast Asian literary translation collective called The Seams. And it's been really like cool to just talk with other people and exchange notes with other people who are also translating like, you know, Southeast Asian literary works and Asian literary work. And because I feel like it's slightly different than translating from like, you know, other languages. So, you know, there's more parallels and we share like, you know, some of the same frustrations or challenges. But that's, you know, like it's been really nice and joy giving to be part of this translators collective. I guess the other thing, and I only have like a few minutes, so this is the last thing I'll talk about, is you know, not being afraid to defend yourself, the work you're translating, and also your principles as a literary translator and human being in general. And I think this is important, you know, because it kind of goes back to point one, which I was talking about, where, you know, like choosing projects that are meaningful. I think at the end of the day, I don't know, you want to just be able to say that you did your best, you're trying your best, you fought your best. And that I think does have an effect on how empowered we feel in this line of work, and also how confident we feel, and also how happy we feel. So I would always say, you know, don't be afraid to negotiate on a contract. And I think it's easy to feel afraid to negotiate if you're a newer translator and you're, you know, kind of in newer waters. And actually that's where it's useful to have other literary translator friends, or, you know, like ask a translator that, you know, like, does this seem like an okay thing to you? Or, you know, like you can also look at standards and recommended rates of pay for literary translators, and you know, like sample contracts for translators from, for example, the Society of Authors, and there's a few out there. I think Pen America had one for a while on their website. But I think, you know, it's important, right, to for your well-being. So even if the answer is no, we cannot pay you X much that you asked for, you know, they might be able to negotiate, or, you know, at least you can feel like you tried, and now you can say like, okay, so I know what I'm walking into. I'm walking into a less than ideal situation, do I still want to walk into that situation, or do I want to just get out right now? Right? Because the answer might never, like it depends on you. Right? So I think that's important actually for long-term sustainability and mental well-being as a translator. And I think it's also important to defend, your beliefs and choices that you make as a translator, and the authors or the texts if necessary. Like sometimes, I've had battles. I don't want to say battles, but like kind of like debates with editors about they really would prefer me not to use that word, but I'm like, but that word is in the original text, and I would like to keep it for this XXX reasons. And you can always push back a little bit, especially if you have a good reason to. If it's not just like you being, not like a small matter. It's a matter of some ideological significance, or just because it has something to do with the integrity of the text, or the integrity of the author's text, or the author's perspective, or your own work, or something like that. I think it's good to also do that, and to also feel like you can stand up for yourself and for your translation work and the integrity of your translation work as well. Because again, you may not succeed to the extent that you want. You may have had to compromise, but it's better than not taking a stand and regretting it afterwards. This ties into, mental well-being as a translator. You can at least say you're trying your best, you tried your best, and you're, standing tall in some respect. So in concluding remarks. Okay, I'm just going to expose myself, if I haven't already, as a enormous geek. I really used to love Broadway a lot. Well, I guess everyone loves Broadway now. It's like the golden age of Broadway's revival. But there's a song from that musical, a chorus line, and it's called "What I Did for Love." And one of the dancers sings it because the director, who's also her ex-lover, kind of confusing anyway. So he says like, well, if you had to stop dancing today, then what, how would you feel, right? And then she sings this whole song, "What I Did for Love." And the whole thing is, they danced because they loved it, and they knew that they couldn't do it forever necessarily, and they knew that the conditions are really shit. I'm not saying that translating conditions are always shit, but they did it, and they really like pushed themselves, and they can't regret what they did for love, right? Can't regret what I did for love. And I think that's a good principle to bring to translating, to translate like so you'll have no regrets, right? Regrets about what you did or didn't do. I think that's actually a good thing to think about when you are making those individual choices as you go on as a translator. Will I regret not trying to translate this work? Will I regret taking this project on? Will I regret not taking this project on? Right. Those are things that you can think about, and things that we work towards in, doing what we love, so we can do what we love, so we can continue doing what we love. Okay, I think that's it there. I will stop there. Okay, and there are questions. One is from Robin Archer. Nia is typing the questions for me in the Zoom, so I can read them and answer them. How do you start to build a portfolio? Is translating poems or songs, etc., in your spare time a good way to get started? I think absolutely. Okay, so I guess I'll answer the second question first before the first question. I think it's just useful always to be, thinking like, how would I translate this? How would I translate this? Actually, there's this question I got for this, I guess, virtual questionnaire or Instagram questionnaire time with like an Instagram-based Southeast Asian book club. And they gave me a line of a Taylor Swift song to translate. I forget what the Taylor Swift song is, but I still like that actually, like, I was thinking for days about it, like, oh, how do I, because I had to translate it from English into Indonesian, which is not my usual way of doing it. And I was just thinking about it all the time and like humming it, singing that refrain, and then like trying to, translate it in a way that's also catchy and like sounds like it would be catchy in Indonesian as well. And I think those are all really good mental exercises, like, translating poems, translating song lyrics, translating little passages, translating like turns of phrase, in your head to get going. In terms of building a portfolio, though, so those are, I think, useful as mental exercises for translators. To build a portfolio, I think, well, it depends, right? So if you're good at translating poetry, because I would say that translating poetry is a gift. Not everyone is good at translating poetry. I'm more of a prose translator myself, and it's only because I was working closely with Norman Erickson Masaribu on his poetry, and he sort of was encouraging me and giving me tips and all of that I feel more confident translating poetry now. But short stories are also a good way. Flash fiction, although I know flash fiction is the genre does not necessarily exist in all languages. But I think, so short stories and poems and shorter things are a good way to start building your portfolio and submitting those to journals. That would be a good start. And then once you have a publication record, I think it's easier to interest book publishers in contracts because you have a record. Okay, so Claire asks, what made you decide to be a literary translator? Was there one project or moment that made you think, that's what I want to do? And what would you say is the first thing to learn when you start? Okay, so actually, so I was telling Nia earlier that I'm, because she's like, oh, what do you do usually? Do you teach? And I'm actually a failed academic. So I'm a failed academic. I left because I was just, it's a long story. Okay, I'm not going to go into why I left. There's just a whole other can of worms there. So when I left academia and I was sort of madly applying for various jobs, mostly in like the editing industry, publishing industry, my agent who was representing the novel I wrote, it took 8 years to write, said, oh, like Indonesia is the guest of honor at the Frankfurt Book Fair this year. And just wondering, do you know, I'd be interested in representing some Indonesian authors. Do you happen to know any? And this is when I could draw on my knowledge of, Indonesian literature, because I actually had studied Indonesian literature as well for my PhD in English literature. But, I was like, oh, yes, I can totally do research and I can totally help you with a proposal. I can come up with, samples. And that's when I started as well. I also started at the same time when I left academia. I had thought, oh, maybe my Indonesian language skills will come in handy. And so I began volunteering on staff at Asymptote Literary Journal. And I became their Indonesia editor at large. And that's when I also began sort of thinking more about translation and putting my feet, dipping my toe into translation. And for them, because I had to come up with samples from potential Indonesian writers to solicit. And I couldn't always come up with, like ready-made, like it wasn't necessarily already translated. So I would have to translate myself for the consideration of the various section editors, so the poetry editor, the fiction editor, the nonfiction editor, etc. So it wasn't really one project or moment that made me think that's what I want to do. I think it was more like a confluence of bad circumstance coupled with, oh, I could do that, to, oh, I'm really liking this and I'm quite good at it. Sorry to toot my own horn. First thing to learn, okay. Oh, okay. First thing to learn when, oh, okay, hold on. Nia just put a whole bunch of things in the chat and then said ignore those, which is good because I didn't know what to make of them. But just to answer the very last question from Claire, what would you say is the first thing to learn when you start? I'd say the language. Yes. Sorry. I'm not meaning to be smart. I just thought that maybe, yes, the language would be a good thing to learn. What is your favorite nuance in the Indonesian language that often gets lost when translating into English? I don't have a favorite, but I can list two. So one is the fact that they use genderless pronouns or like gender neutral pronouns. So dia just means like he/her/ they, you know, like it's just for a third person. And that I've noticed I don't know, like in some cases it can have a very equalizing effect. So for example, right now, I'm just finished translating a sample for a novel by Bodhidharma called Olenka. And it starts off with saying, this person, I met this person, sorry, this is paraphrase. I met this person in the lift and I would find out later their name was Olenka, right? But in Indonesian, it's just like that. So you actually don't know, there's some ambiguity about whether it's a man or a woman. And then you find out, but you know, in English, if you were to translate that, it like you probably, you know, so I'm like I don't know, it just, it sounds different if you say, you know, I saw a woman in the lift, right? Like you automatically know right off the bat. So I'm trying to retain that ambiguity in the sample. The other nuance that I like in the Indonesian language is something that is actually frowned upon in English, which is the passive construction. Because I found that the passive construction, I don't know, like I just really like it. I think the like once you see it, like there's all of these cool structures that can be built in, like a sentence can become like longer in a way, and it can like have more suspense to it, and there can be also more ambiguity naturally about who's the active subject, which can be a good thing. So those are two things that, you know, I like. Yes. Okay, and
Hi, thank you so much for that. We just have one last question, which is, how do you know a translation is finished to your satisfaction? Which I thought was a good one to end on.
Okay. I don't think you ever know. I don't think you ever know. You kind of have to stop. You just have to stop fiddling at some point. And you will get a chance, you know, if it's a book project and you're working with a publisher, you'll get ample chance to fiddle, because then they'll come back with the developmental edits, they'll come back with the copy edits, and by the proofreading, you'll be really tired of reading your own translation. So you'll say, yeah, it's done. That's fine, it's done. Because you'll be really sick of it by that point, and you won't even be able to, I don't know, catch anything if you aren't reading it out loud, which sometimes I do to try and get rid of typos.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I'd just like to say to everyone watching, sorry for the technical difficulty at the start there. As with things that go live on YouTube, it doesn't always go to plan. But yeah, Tiffany, thank you so much for your time. And yeah, we're really happy to have had you as our guest keynote for this year. And we can't wait to see what else you have coming up.
Thanks.